Despite their reputation of being overly protective of their characters and franchises, Nintendo has a long history of weird crossovers. Mario alone has met the Rabbids twice in full-length RPGs, played Monopoly with a slime, played basketball with a Moogle, played basketball with real people, and whoa. Whoa. But the weirdest ones are when Mario crosses over with Donkey Kong. Despite them starting from the same game, they quickly split off into their own things, with Mario becoming the main series and Donkey Kong fading into a bit of obscurity until Donkey Kong Country released. When Mario spin-offs started to become a big thing, Donkey Kong was a shoo-in to get a slot in a game like Mario Kart or Mario Party, but it was clear that the vision for what the future of his series was going to be wasn't quite clear yet. Donkey Kong Jr. was the character they chose for Super Mario Kart, but when Donkey Kong himself finally showed up in games like Mario Kart 64 and Mario Tennis, there were still some weird inconsistencies. His doubles partner in Mario Tennis was Donkey Kong Jr., who, according to the Donkey Kong Country games, is either him or his father. And it wasn't until Mario Kart Double Dash that Diddy Kong appeared for the first time in a Mario game. But while Mario and Donkey Kong were still mostly separate, Diddy Kong was off having his own crossovers. In Diddy Kong Racing, a racing game about Diddy Kong, the titular Kong gets to race alongside characters like Banjo from Banjo-Kazooie and Conker from Conker's Bad Fur Day before he started drinking. The developers, Rare, wanted to advertise their upcoming game, 12 Tales Conker 64, but at some point in development it went under a wild reinvention. Obviously when they put him in Diddy Kong Racing, he was planned to be a more traditional, family-friendly character, but now, looking back on it, it's really weird. Of course, Mario and Mario-adjacent games aren't the only ones to get crossovers, with Little Mac from Super Punch-Out appearing in Fight Night Round 2, and also Donkey Kong being in Punch-Out Wii. And more interestingly, The Legend of Zelda crossing over with the indie series Crypt of the Necrodancer. This one's weird because unlike the Rabbids, which are owned by Ubisoft, which is a fairly big company, Crypt of the Necrodancer is truly an indie game. And Nintendo gave the developers the keys to probably their second biggest franchise. It's really interesting, and I would love to see it happen more, and maybe even see it happen with smaller series that Nintendo doesn't really have anything to do with. Of course, going back to Mario, there's one iconic crossover that has to be mentioned. The first time gaming's greatest rivalry ever met, in the late 2000s, Mario and Sonic finally got to face off head-to-head for the first time in gaming's most iconic battleground, Beijing, China. Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games is the first ever crossover between the two series, and the first game in a series that continued for over a decade. For some reason, the first crossover between these two gaming icons was a minigame collection of different Olympic sports. Nowadays, the Olympic Games series isn't really looked upon that fondly, with most people just wishing that they did a more traditional platformer or maybe even an RPG. But honestly, they're really charming little games. If you aren't expecting too much from them, it's just fun to see Shadow the Hedgehog meet Yoshi. But if you wanted to see Mario and Sonic finally fight for real, you'd only have to wait a few more months. Super Smash Bros. Brawl is the weird middle child of the Smash series. It was made in response to the previous game, and it's the title that all future games would be made in response to. There's a lot to be said about the gameplay of Brawl and how it alienated the competitive audience, but I wanted to talk about its most unique addition to the series, and the only time that Smash Bros. Has felt like a proper crossover: the Subspace Emissary. Super Smash Bros. Melee attempted an adventure mode, but with the Subspace Emissary, Brawl took that idea and ran with it, giving players a full story mode with a bunch of cutscenes and, unfortunately, some levels too. The gameplay of the Subspace Emissary is really not much to write home about, with the gameplay of the Super Smash Bros. Series not translating particularly well into a more traditional platformer. But its story is interesting. because it has one. Normally, the Smash Bros. Series is contextualized as being a kid just playing with toys. But now, these characters are alive and they get to meet each other, and we get to see Princess Peach and Solid Snake hang out. But as Smash grows more and more into a celebration of gaming as a whole and becomes less and less of a Nintendo crossover, I think seeing more character interactions is something that should really come back in a future title. And I know I'm not alone on that. This was originally going to be a more broad video about just the topic of gaming crossovers as a whole, but then I fell down, like what often happens, I fell down a Donkey Kong rabbit hole, and I just had to complain, or not complain, I just had to talk about how weird Diddy Kong Racing is to me. I can't figure out what that game is. Obviously, it's a racing game, and it's about Diddy Kong. But also, is it a Mario spin-off? It's a Donkey Kong spin-off. But Donkey Kong and Mario, I don't know. It's weird how inconsistent it is whether or not Mario and Donkey Kong are considered the same series. But yeah, Diddy Kong Racing, weird game. Next video is going to be about Sonic, hopefully. Bye!